we're happy to welcome Christos Memis. He's the editor-in-chief of Protagon.gr, and he's a board member of GEN. And please clap your hand and just thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for the early rise. I understand it's not so easy to be here early in the morning, at least for Greeks it's early. And especially if you were in Zapion yesterday, where we had this celebration with the guy there, the white-haired guy who entertained us. Thank you very much. Well, this is, as you know, last-minute change in the program, because with Bertrand, we understood that being in Greece now, between two elections, you might feel that you need some more information of what is going on in this country this summer. Because this summer, for Greece, is a crucial summer. We had the European elections who changed the political scenery up-down. Syriza was defeated heavily. New Democracy, the center of the right party, is coming probably, as all the polls say, to power. And after 4 years and the economic crisis of 10 years, we have many things to discuss. And I think that half an hour is not much, but we'll try, my colleagues and I will try to help you understand what is going on. Let me introduce them. On my left is Aléxis Tsípras, the editor-in-chief of Kathimerini, a respected daily newspaper and also a media company, big media company. On my right is Angelos Kouveos, political editor of Tovima, the other respected Greek newspaper. There are these two mainly, for many years, the most respected papers. And there is Apostolos Mangiriadis from Sky TV, and it's also a very good TV station. And I'll give the microphone to Aléxis to explain to us what happened in 26th of May, not in Europe generally, but in Greece especially, because this is important.
Okay. Thank you, Christo. Thank you for this opportunity to be here today. It's a bit early in the morning, especially for a Greek summer weekend. But I'll try to give you a snapshot of what I think is going on in this country. But I think we need a bit of context. Basically, you know, you all know about the economic crisis of Greece. People have lost about 25% of their income. We've lost 25% of our GDP in 8 or 9 years. This is a very dramatic shift. People lost any kind of hope. People got exhausted. They got very, very angry. And Greece has basically been through everything else that the rest of the West, Europe and the US, has gone through in the recent years. What I mean by that is, you know, if you take any kind of phenomenon we all occupy ourselves with, Yellow Jacket protests, we've had them for many years here down in the main square of, downtown square of Athens, you know, for every day. People were demonstrating outside the parliament. We had the blossoming of the social media in the beginning of the crisis in 2009, 2010, when people basically lost any kind of faith or trust in mainstream media and also in the mainstream political system. We even had a referendum way before the Brits had theirs. And I think basically one thing we learned through all these years, because they were very hard years, especially for us and for me running a newspaper, it was almost like the perfect storm. Because we had to deal with the financial crisis, We had to deal with a structural crisis that every newspaper is facing around the world. You paid a lot of attention to this in the last couple of days. And we also had a huge political and social turmoil. One thing I learned from all this is the need to listen. We do a lot of talking as journalists, but basically I think we were missing the point. We lived in our own bubble, in the elite bubble, let's say. And that's why back in 2012, for example, when the whole political situation went upside down, when we had Syriza, which was a very anti-systemic leftist party back then, when we had Golden Dawn, the neo-Nazi party getting quite a bit of strength, we completely missed that. We didn't see it coming. We were almost like the New York Times and the Washington Post, when they didn't see Trump coming. So this was a big lesson for us, that we really have to learn the art of listening. It's not easy, but we have to. Now, what has been happening in the last year, I think, is that people have really gotten very tired. They want some stability, they want some normalcy. And we are coming out of this populist extremism, populism, nationalism, all this phase that we went through for the past few years. Maybe we were, the first in the cycle in some ways. So I think it's like very refreshing that even though we had this huge migration crisis, even though we had this huge economic crisis, the country is still standing on its own feet. We're very close to civil war, but we didn't go down that slippery path. And I think people have gotten more mature, let's say, in the last couple of years. They've realized there is no other way except for, staying in the Eurozone and being part of Europe. It's really amazing to me that after all this, the euro is still very popular. It has about 65% of support. And I think that's very remarkable. Now, what happened in the election, in the last election? New Democracy, which is a very traditional conservative party, was first with quite a big difference. Syriza suffered a big defeat. They were almost 10 points behind. More remarkable, in my opinion, is that the fact that Golden Dawn lost about half of its strength. And this is really good news in this country. Even though I have to put the disclaimer there, which is, to me, it's a bit, it's a matter of concern that the Golden Dawn is still very popular with the youth. They got about 5%, but when you look at the exit poll data, they still have like 15% of among the ages of 17 to 24. And I think this is something that we have to pay some attention to, and something also you can explain easily when somebody, will tell you that the youth unemployment numbers are still up up to the 40 or 50%. So I think, in some ways, the country will become a bit more boring. There will be less of you coming here, to cover the country, at least for a while. The prediction is that New Democracy is going to win with quite a big majority. I think Syriza has become a much more mainstream party than it used to be. In foreign policy, in economic policy, they have become much more realistic. And in my view, this is a good thing. It's a healthy kind of development. And they have to go through this period of self-analysis, and maybe they're going to reach some interesting conclusions. And therefore, I actually believe that we're going to enter a phase of, relative normalcy. We'll go through some reforms, which I think are needed. And let me just conclude by saying that, one thing we have proven as Greeks is that we have a real resilience. I always kid my British friends, who are in despair now. And I tell them the difference between us and them is that we don't take our institutions too seriously. We're too flexible. We've been around for 2,000 years, and we know how to deal with this kind of crisis. So even, we had a referendum. They take it seriously. They don't want to change the result. We voted no, which meant yes. And that's quite something. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Alexis. I'll be back to you. I would like to ask Angelos Koveos, what let's be a little bit more analytical about the defeat, the incoming, as we can see it. First, the defeat in the European elections, now the incoming defeat of Syriza. How this party who was running the country for 4.5 years steadily is in this mess now. Why that?
Thank you and good morning. My explanation is quite simple to that. I think for the past 4 years, or maybe 6 or 7 years, we have taken Syriza and Aléxis Tsípras very seriously. We always thought, okay, this is the left coming, they will save the country. Aléxis Tsípras is a political star on the rise. He has a magic touch. He would do anything. He would shift any situation in any way possible. He had the luck to govern the country for 4 years, 4.5 years, no, 4 years, without any other election on his way, either a presidential election or a communal election or whatever. After 4 years, the Greeks came to vote. They suffered everything possible, and the years before that. They got fed up with a lot of things. They got fed up with lies. They got fed up with somebody insulting them all the time in any possible way, be it the government or the opposition or any other possible party. So, after 4 years, Aléxis Tsípras and Syriza thought they wouldn't lose the election with such a huge difference they did. There were people in his party telling him, do it all at once, all 3 elections. He didn't listen to them. He thought, okay, I'll do my best. I'll have the best possible result in the European election, and then I go all the way to a national election in October. They didn't have an idea what was coming up to them. And I think this shows a lot. Syriza is not a party in a traditional way. I mean, the way people think it is, even in Greece, but outside Greece especially. It's not, that may sound a bit bizarre, but it's not a party rooted in the Greek society. It was a political force on the rise because of the crisis. It didn't solve the problems it promised to solve. And that's why this happens now. I think, to put it in one sentence, I think we had 4 years of political nonsense, not only because Syriza, because of other people as well, of other parties. But now it's the end of it. And I think the most interesting phenomenon in this election in Greece is that New Democracy is on the rise again, a party for many people the years before responsible for the crisis. But you have no party gatherings, you had a very quiet city, you had nobody celebrating a party victory, which to me is the most optimistic thing about what is happening now. We'll see what comes next, but this is the situation as I see it, and I think there is a bit of hope now.
Christos, can I please offer a politically psychological approach?
Yeah, I'll give you a chance to do that. But I want to clarify for our foreign audience, because some things are Greek to you. I have to explain that whoever, if you don't know it, in 26th of May, we had the European elections and we also had the regional and city hall elections, which is also a very important factor in our political life. And in these elections, Syriza was also crushed. New Democracy, in the second round, he succeeded to control 12 of the 13 regional governments in Greece. That's a point you have to have in mind on what happened. And the second thing I have to clarify is that when you speak about Tsipras, is Syriza. Syriza is the party, the governing party, just for the record. So you have an explanation, but I expect from you also, because that's what I had in my mind, to try to read the future. I mean, we have the incoming government, what problems they might inherit from Syriza and what lies ahead. Please.
Absolutely. Let me touch upon a little bit on what Alexis and Angelos said. I had a friend calling me from Brussels the other day in the aftermath of the European elections. He asked me, he said, I've been following the Greek financial crisis over the last 10 years, and please explain to me the result with New Democracy winning with a landslide. And I told him that in my view, in my sense, well, societies are also, in a sense, when they go to vote, we're trying to examine their psychological situation. So I tried to use the example from the science of psychology, which is the 5 stages of grief. And I said back in 2009, when the financial crisis broke, the Greek people and the Greek society was on the stage number 1, which is denial. We all voted for George Papandreou, whose basic motto was, you know, money exists, compared to what Karamanlis would say, that we have to impose some kind of austerity in the country. And then in 2012, that was the years of anger, the second stage of grief, when we saw Golden Dawn rising and Syriza rising, and even the party Independent Greeks. That was one of the most significant successes of this crisis. And then the third stage was negotiation. And we had this infamous 6 months led by Yannis Varoufakis and his stylish negotiations that ended nowhere, that ended up with a referendum, actually. That costed 100 billion, whatever, some other people say 200 billion. But still, after Tsipras signed his own memorandum, we were on the 4th stage. Probably, the Tsipras memorandum was the harshest of all the other 3, but the society was on the 4th stage, and that's the stage of depression, that we saw no demonstration on the streets whatsoever. No one cared. And then we're at stage 5 right now, and we're on the stage of acceptance, that people realized that there was no alternative. And we've been 10 years in the crisis. We've lost 25% of our GDP. We had huge unemployment percentages, but there's still hope. And as Alexis said, there's resilience in the society, and things are coming back to normal. So that leads me to your question, Christos. I think there are 3 things that Mitsotakis is now, he will be challenged on 3 various issues. Number 1 is whether he will restore confidence in the economy, and the investments will be coming back. That's one thing. He will be elected on the basis that he will offer some tax breaks. He will offer tax breaks both to small and middle-sized companies and also to households. Number 2 is the institutional changes that he is facing, the constitution change, the way that he will govern within his own party, because don't forget that Mitsotakis is not, he was the underdog during his primaries, and he's not supported by his party as the way that previous presidents were supported. And the third issue is what economical and political landscape he will be functioning in over the next 4 years, in terms of how Europe will come back, whether he will face any other recession. So I think most of the part, he will definitely get the majority vote in the parliament. I can bet on that. And the good thing, as Angelo said, he only has he won't have any other elections during his tenure, and I think that he has all the chances with him.
Yeah, thank you. I'll ask Alexis to explain to our audience what Mitsotakis, if he is elected as we expect, will confront in terms of foreign policy. We have Turkey. Turkey is a very serious problem for us for centuries, not years, and so on and so on. Please.
Okay, let me just say 2 quick things about the economic situation. One very important point is our creditors, with the assistance of Germany, they have placed a straitjacket on Greece, which is a mandatory 3.5% of primary surplus, which means Greece every year has not only to balance its budget, but it has to put aside 3.5% of the GDP in order to pay the debt. And this is a real unhealthy straitjacket. Tsipras tried to get rid of it via the Varoufakis game theory or blackmail or whatever. He failed. And I think Mitsotakis will try at some point to do the same, because otherwise he cannot do the tax cuts and everything else. That's going to be a very difficult challenge, in my opinion. And the second thing is, what the new government wants to do is things like this building here. You cannot imagine what kind of effort and problems went, on before this whole project was completed, because, nobody wanted it for many years, even though there was a foundation that wanted to pay, for the whole thing. And now we're all very proud of it. This current government, which was very opposed to this, is now very supportive. And in my opinion, there's great potential in this country. If you look south of here, there's like an amazing waterfront, which has been undeveloped for years. If you turn this around and you turn it into a Barcelona kind of waterfront, with some restrictions so you don't have the problems Barcelona is facing, you could really add like a couple of points to the GDP. These are the kinds of things that Mitsotakis wants to do. It will not be easy. There's a lot of red tape here. There's a lot of vested interests that don't want this kind of thing. That will be the big challenge. Now, foreign policy, Mitsotakis was very opposed to an agreement that this government signed with our neighbors in the north, North Macedonia. That will be a challenge for him, because the Europeans want North Macedonia to eventually become a member of the EU. He will have to do his own somersault in terms of this. It will not be easy, because his party is really, very tough, very militant on this issue. I think this will be one of his first challenges. The second challenge, of course, has to do with Turkey. We have a very unpredictable neighbor. Erdogan is facing huge economic pressure. He will have to face a dilemma. As you know, there's this thing where he will have to decide whether he's going to get these missiles, the S-400 from the Russians, or get the F-35s he has paid for from the US. And this is coming up soon. He will have to make up his mind. And at the same time, he's challenging both Cyprus and Greece in terms of their rights to explore some of the natural resources that exist in our seas and all this. And the problem is that the asymmetry between Greece and Turkey in terms of the military situation is really devastating for Greece because of the economic crisis. I mean, Greece has really stayed, behind in terms of this. So that's, I think, quite a big challenge. And it's more challenging because you don't really know what the US is going to do. I mean, who knows what, Trump administration will do if something happens between Greece and Turkey. In the old days, you pretty much knew what was going to happen. Now it's a personal thing. Maybe the in-laws of both Trump and Erdogan, will communicate, through a back channel or something. It's not like the old, it's a black box now for us. And this is something of concern.
Thank you. Thank you, Alexis. We have the chance, I would prefer, we have 3 minutes and 3 minutes and 16 seconds. Let's have 1 or 2 questions, please. Yes, please. She's not prepared for you. My friend from Al-Ahram.
Yes. Your friend from Al-Ahram, Christos.
Yeah. You were here for many years working as a correspondent. You have to tell this to people.
Exactly. Yeah, I was here for 5 years as a correspondent, but that was long ago, 25 years ago. So first of all, I would like to know if Tsipras was able to solve any, somehow, not completely, or his achievements, in fact, when it comes to the debt problem. Was he able to do any good things at all? This is first. Secondly, do you believe that changing the government and New Democracy, if they will win, would have a better opportunity to solve this problem? And thirdly, speaking of Turkey and Greece under Tsipras, while being in power, there is some regional cooperation with Egypt and Cyprus. So do you believe such cooperation, or that's something related to Tsipras and the way he thinks, or it's more related to the Greek national security. In other ways, will it last later, or it might be over?
You got 2 minutes asking.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I think Alexis will answer just the one, because it's of interest for you, the collaboration, the axis between Egypt, Israel, Cyprus, and Greece against Turkey. That's all. 1 and 20 for you.
Okay, very quickly. Back in 2010, the Papandreou government, which was a socialist government, started this cooperation initially between Israel, Cyprus, and Greece. And then Egypt was brought in at some point, as a separate, of course, ally, but it was brought in. And this was continued by the governments that followed. For us, it was quite astounding that Tsípras, who was demonstrating, he was supporting the Gaza flotillas and all this, he did a complete turnaround, and he became a very loyal supporter of this alliance. He's very close to Bibi Netanyahu now. They become very good friends. For us, it was something quite remarkable, and I think this will obviously continue with the next government. I mean, for us, one of the most amazing things is the Israelis were asking for a radar in Greece for their own purposes. No government dared give it to them, and then this leftist Syriza government decided to give it to them, which is something remarkable.
Thank you.
No, we have only 10 seconds, and I want to pass the exams for next year. You'll give me the panel again next year. We are finished. Well, if you have any other questions, we would like to meet you outside or somewhere and discuss. Thank you very much.
Please do.
Thank you very much.